I'll get like a 3-4 KD, and I'll just be cleaning up, and I'll just be on every objective, and we'll win by a landslide. When you get the really tough lobbies, and you're like, okay, you know, that's one story, whatever. But it's like, I almost like, why is it allowing me to suddenly have such an incredible game? And it goes back to the psychology thing where people say it's trying to keep you playing for longer. So it's like, here, have a good game, play some more. I don't know if that's an actual thing. I believe it might be when you talk about retention, but
that is part of it, but
it's trying to keep you playing for longer. So it's like, here, have a good game, play some more.
That is part of it.
Yeah, this video is a doozy. Long story short, I think I figured out exactly how Call of Duty's matchmaking works. And it's not SBMM, but it's also not EOMM. Not one person has actually hit the nail on the head yet. And as this guy puts it,
engagement optimized, even conspiracy theories, where as far as I know and as far as I can tell, like they're still not doing that. Like the matchmaking paper that they published has nothing about that in there. And I would take that at their word. Like they have no reason to lie about it.
This guy's name is Charlie Olson, and he designed the first iteration of Call of Duty's matchmaking. He was recently interviewed on a podcast, and I sat through the entire hour-long thing, and there's a few moments in there that are undoubtedly suspicious, and I finally discovered how I think the matchmaking truly works. And nobody on the internet has even touched this idea yet. You heard what he said. Retention is part of the matchmaking philosophy, but it's not the entire thing. Before I go, please like this video and subscribe to the channel. Anyways, let's jump in. When asked if player retention is the goal of the matchmaking and whether or not the game allows certain rare, amazing performances in order to retain players and not scare them off, he responds with,
that is part of it.
That's part of it. Then immediately changes the subject. Then when he readdresses the subject, he calls EOMM a conspiracy theory. I have my thoughts about this interview, and I have my speculations as to why, despite having such a long interview, not much information was actually revealed. This is clue number one as to how we know the matchmaking is shady. It's not purely based on connection or skill, and we obviously know that. It would have been admitted by this guy and Activision much earlier into the interview if that were the case. However, when he addresses EOMM, he drops the bombshell about Marvel Rivals, and that is that Marvel Rivals uses true EOMM.
Marvel Rivals, like their matchmaker is true engagement optimized matchmaking.
It measures player engagement and money spent and truly tries to adjust the matchmaking to improve these variables, which means literally by definition, Marvel Rivals is 100% rigged. So I am never touching that game again. However, he clearly compares the system to Call of Duty and says the two are not the same. So wait, what the heck gives here? First we get retention is part of it. Then we get that's what people are worried about and they're not on that level. So how are we supposed to gauge what these two contradictory statements mean? And let me tell you, once I put 2 and 2 together, I figured out that he can say that COD doesn't use true EOMM because it doesn't. They figured out something that's far more complicated and far more effective. Well, for starters, these two clips explain a ton about COD's matchmaking.
When they do well, they're going to get kicked up into a higher bracket. Like their MMR is going to spike, and then they're going to get kicked back down, and this is a bad experience, this whiplashes. But then the high skill players, they might have an off game, but it's not going to adjust them down as much. It's not going to adjust to them as much as it should. So it changes less when you're at the extremes.
Super volatile MMR, and MMR is less volatile at the extremes. COD's MMR, or matchmaking rank, your skill level as measured by the algorithm, is normally extremely volatile. For those of you who don't know, volatile means that it changes drastically and frequently. So after a loss, instead of losing a little bit of MMR, you lose a lot. I'm going to say that word a lot, so just understand what volatile means. But this reveals something else that a lot of people don't realize. MMR is not like ranked ELO. It's not simply your rank compared to every other player in the world. Rather, it's your average performance across, say, a day. And this is what a lot of other shooters get wrong, at least according to the interview. Lots of ELO systems, like that of many other games, allow you to gain and lose ELO at a steady rate. For example, losing a game makes you drop 15 ELO, and winning a game makes you gain 15 ELO. Not only is this not a skill rating, it's also not effective for player retention and true measurement because it's more of a measurement of how consistently you can win, not how good you are. Yes, there is a difference, especially in a team-based shooter where winning also depends on your teammates. In a solo game like chess, obviously higher win rates will breed higher elos, but in a solo game, a higher win rate generally means higher skill. Instead, COD's MMR is described as super volatile, which is another way of saying that after one bad game, or even multiple bad games, your skill rating absolutely tanks, and you're faced with a super easy match, which makes it look like EOMM. It looks like a purposely bad match, even though it's simply a result of your highly volatile MMR dropping an insane amount after a few losses. However, something he mentions is that MMR volatility follows a bell curve, meaning that in the middle, your MMR is extremely volatile, but on the outliers, on the extremes, the best and worst players, it is not as volatile, which means that if an insanely good player in the top 5%, say, does very poorly or extremely well in a match, their MMR will barely fall. Or if a terrible player has an awful or great game, it will barely adjust either. But if an average player has a terrible or great game, their MMR adjusts majorly. On the extremes, your MMR doesn't change that much regardless of performance, but in the middle, your MMR constantly fluctuates. You'd think volatile MMR would be a better system than EOMM, but then you realize there's actually not much difference at all. Both supply easier or harder matches based on performance, both measure performance on that one particular play session, so your experience is optimized from session to session based on averages, and both keep good players from stomping too often and bad players from getting stomped because they bar off both kinds of players from the majority of the player base, given their MMR is a lot less volatile. But volatile MMR offers an advantage over EOMM because instead of adding an extra variable, the engagement state, to the algorithm, it instead solely utilizes a skill rating that reflects your performance that day, especially if you're average. The most impressionable and fluctuating part of the player base are the mid-skill players. Terrible players and great players normally will not experience huge changes in their playstyle because one likely barely plays or plays just casually, and one plays all the time, always practices, and never loses their skills, thus removing the need to make them shift brackets at all. Mid-skill players can move in either direction based on the day, which is what volatile SBMM does so effectively. Volatile MMR for the majority of the player base is more effective than EOMM because you're matching against players that have been performing similarly to you. Instead of using an ELO system like a ranked mode would, volatile MMR literally measures the average value of your performance and matches you like that. Every time you play badly, your average drops significantly. If your MMR only adjusted slightly upwards or downwards depending on your performance, you'd likely see no change in experience, and from a business perspective, players would get aggravated and not stay retained, especially if they were just having a bad day. So volatile MMR is actually much more effective on paper than EOMM, and I think Activision realized that. It's technically EOMM, but better, and that's why this guy can deny EOMM is used for COD, because the system they use is technically EOMM on roids, and it also sounds far less manipulative. And this is keeping good players separated from everyone else, and keeping terrible players from being stomped by anyone better than them, which is exactly what we've been saying. However, this is not only backed up by evidence, it's also backed up by this exact description given by the inventor of COD's matchmaking. This is when he brings up matchmaking buckets, and this is where we start to enter some insane territory, because this is where all is revealed. Brace yourself.
Almost something like average KD ratio, and then put you into 3 different buckets, and then we try to match you with one bucket on like above or below. Middle could match with anybody, but like the low end would only match with middle tier. So I think it started changing in 2016, and then was it 2015, whenever Black Ops 3 came out.
Matchmaking buckets could also be called brackets. They're just different groups of players within the player base. If a player is placed in a bucket or a certain amount of buckets, they can only be matched with players within that bucket or that group, but you're not placed in a bucket before you matchmake. In early COD, there were 3 buckets: low skill, medium skill, and high skill. So if you're a low skill player, he's saying that the game might either place you in a mid skill bucket or the low skill bucket. Medium could be placed in any of the 3, and high skill could match with medium skill or high skill. You can be in multiple brackets at one time. The point is, these buckets are like matchmaking brackets, and the creator of SBMM just said that COD used this 3-bucket system in early titles. However, just him admitting admitting that COD used a bucket system just opened up a whole can of worms I don't think the community is ready for. And that is the fact that Call of Duty doesn't just have one matchmaking algorithm. The type of matchmaking you get is different every time you queue up. Each matchmaking bucket functions differently. And here's the best part. This was data mined in Call of Duty 6 years ago, 2016, the exact year Charlie Olson said they used a 3-bucket system in Call of Duty. And look at this: skill bucket, high skill bucket, party bucket, and look at this right here: advert bucket, an advertising matchmaking bracket. We have a matchmaking bucket within a COD game 9 years ago that is specifically intended to advertise to the player in the middle of the match, obviously to encourage in-game purchases. Not to mention there are buckets that do a skill measurement, a bucket for high skill players, and a bucket for players who are in a party. And here's one of the best parts too. See this? It's not skill bucket, it's skill buckets. Plural. That 3-bucket system he was talking about, it looks like this file envelops all of the skill buckets that he mentioned. But he obviously failed to include the rest of the buckets, including the advertising bucket. I wonder why. His testimony absolutely checks out with the skill buckets, but he doesn't mention the one thing that's actually condemning. And I'm willing to bet he knew about it. And following Advanced Warfare in 2014, Black Ops 3, the game in which this system first took place, was only the second time they've heavily monetized the game with microtransactions like loot boxes. An advert bucket wouldn't have made sense a couple years before, but as soon as you could pull skins out of loot boxes, they could encourage the purchase by having an advertising matchmaking bracket. And maybe more, we just can't see them on this screen. Despite this being pretty rudimentary, there is no doubt at this point that Call of Duty intends to advertise to you mid-game, and it has a specific matchmaking bucket that is intended to accomplish just this. But wait, Activision has admitted in a live presentation to reading your player engagement state and simulating matches in order to predict whether you stay engaged or not. So despite using Volatile MMR, engagement is still obviously measured. But why? If EOMM isn't a thing and engagement isn't used in the matchmaking, why is the engagement state clearly measured? Well, my one speculation is that it is used to measure the risk of you quitting the game, otherwise known as the churn risk, and it uses this measurement in order to decide which bucket to place you into. If you're not engaged, an easier match in the skill bucket may help with that. If you're engaged but not spending money, maybe you play with the high skill players. If you're super engaged and there's a chance you spend money, then the game will place you into the advertising bracket, where according to this patent, you're matched with better players who own skins in order to encourage you to spend money on the game. Or if you've bought skins, the game likely tosses you into the advertising bucket as a walking ad in order to encourage other players to buy skins. This is why Charlie Olson can deny EOMM. It's because their secret sauce isn't an engagement-based algorithm. It's multiple algorithms, multiple buckets in one game that are all centralized around coaxing the player into a state of engagement via highly volatile MMR designed to catch you if you're slipping into a state of aggravation, and then capitalizing on that engagement by placing you into the advertising bracket at just the right moment in order to maximize the chances you spend money on the game as a result. And then you become the one that drives the cycle once you do that, because then you are the walking advertisement. And Activision can perfectly measure this engagement and predict how certain matches will engage you, not to optimize your engagement, but rather to predict if you're in a viable state to spend money on the game. It's not EOMM, it's microtransaction centralized matchmaking using multiple brackets, because making one matchmaking system and slapping it on the game not only makes it harder to characterize the game to be engaging to multiple different kinds of players, it's also not the best way to make money on paper. Having a dynamic and adaptive system where different players experience different kinds of matchmaking is the most surefire way to maximize revenue made by the game. That is, until the game sucks and is boring and not fun to play anyways. The system is built to adapt to your performance that day by utilizing an average performance MMR that's highly volatile, and gauging by measuring your engagement when the best time to advertise to you is. It's not meant to maximize player retention, it's meant to maximize revenue. For example, it's better to make $1 billion with 1 million players than it is to make $100 million with 10 million players. Sure, you have more players, but because the experience isn't tailored to advertise and capitalize on engagement, you're making less money despite the game being more fun for more people. So why not scare away the players that don't spend money on microtransactions and instead tailor the game to be as fun and engaging as possible for players who are shown to spend money. Hence Charlie Olson saying measuring engagement is part of it. That's not the intention of the matchmaking. It's not to make sure every single player stays playing. It's to capitalize on the player state and pick the right time to advertise to them. It's literally detailed in the live presentation. The matchmaking isn't to improve engagement, it's to capitalize on it once it's there. Watch this, and then watch my case become completely watertight.
And some states are better than others. If we introduce this feature really early, it can lead to a low engaging state, which we see going down from S1. Now, what our model does is going to look ahead in the future and see, is there a better place that I can introduce this feature that is going to lead to a higher engagement? So in this, you can see there's a path. I need to reroute user to state 2 and state 3, and there, if I send him the same message, is going to lead to higher engagement.
You can see that this presentation completely backs up what I'm saying. The engagement is measured and predicted not necessarily to toss you engaging matches, but rather measurement to pick the exact time to capitalize on that engagement and to show you a quote-unquote message or advertisement at the right time in order to maximize the chances you spend money on the game. And that message or advertisement, as this patent shows us, can easily be and is likely a match where all the players around you are using paid cosmetics. If you don't spend money on COD, pay close attention to your experience. Is it constantly sweaty, stressful, and not fun? It may be that there's a bucket that is specifically designed to keep the players that don't make the game any money away from the players that spend money in order to make sure they don't scare away the cash cows. Maybe that's why the high skill bucket exists. It's obviously going to be a miserable experience to play in a high skill bucket in public matches outside of ranked play. So why does it even exist? I'll leave that up to you. I'm Prime Pete. Stay safe out there, do your research, and take it easy.